Hello, it's Teacher K, and you are about to watch my presentation at the 2022 AIELOC and Women of Color in ELT Conference that happened on November 12th and 13th, 2022, where I talk about finding wholeness in ELT, bringing our history, our ancestry, our ethnicity into the classroom to find wholeness, and some of my experiences with Native Speakerism as well. The first part, you'll see me present on the topic, and the second part is where other participants, educators, and collaborators join the conversation and add their comments, and we discuss the topic. Don't forget to leave your comments and thoughts on the topic so we can continue the discussion. Thank you for watching and enjoy.
And thank you, Maimuna. We are gonna go into a session with Kayla McCasey. I'm so sorry, Kayla, if I'm not pronouncing your last name properly.
You're good.
Good. Okay. Kayla is pronounced as she, her, and she's a descendant of Jamaican and Belizean teachers who made Canada their home 2 generations ago. Her roots, culture, and life experience shape her language, worldview, and are the foundation of her English teaching style, journey, and philosophy. Kayla is Toronto-based, but she began her English teaching career in São Paulo, Brazil, where she founded Diaspora English Learning, which is a platform that seeks to share the diverse cultures and ethnicities found across the English-speaking world while helping students transform into confident and powerful speakers. Please give it up for Kayla.
Thank you for that introduction. Well, I'm very glad to be here and meet you all. But before we get started, I want to thank all those who came before me and made it possible for me to do what I'm doing right now. The teachers, the students, the caretakers, the nurturers, the discipliners, the encouragers, my ancestors. I am because you are. May we enlighten the minds of generations to come. Ashe. And now I will begin. So I'm Kayla, and let me just share presentation mode. A second. Okay, can everyone see the slide? Okay. So I'm Kayla, aka Teacher K. Lots of people know me as Teacher K. I'm an international English teacher, samba dancer, speaker of 4 languages, and the founder of Diaspora English Learning. And feel free to contact me. I would love to connect with you all. You can reach me on social media or you can send me an email. I'd be happy to hear from you all. Okay? And so I'm going to begin to tell you the story of my language teaching career. As Rama told, I began teaching in São Paulo, Brazil. And something interesting happened when I applied for my CELTA certification. I applied at a local language school in São Paulo. I filled out the application, gave all the information, did an interview. And then the coordinator of the program booked a meeting with me to let me know the results of my application. And she said to me the following: "You're in. You're an educated native speaker." And to me, a description of myself never felt so hollow. It never felt so devoid of everything that made me who I am. And the more this description was used in my career, the more I felt like a commodity, something that could be marketed, competitive, sold as a benefit, shown as better or worse than something else. And I began to go through what I call a silent marginalization. Because although it was a description that afforded me access and benefits, it was one that never felt so marginalized by a description. Those with the power to hire and fire felt free to pick and choose the parts of my identity that they liked and didn't like. They wanted to extract the accent, the nationality, the education, the experience, but they wanted to leave behind the Blackness, the history, the community, and definitely my story of who I am as a person. Particularly in my experience, teaching for upper middle class executives, managers, and employees in São Paulo, I would hear phrases or see expressions like, "You're the Canadian teacher." And one of the most puzzling was when people would say, "But you look like the Brazilian and I look like the Canadian," despite the fact that they'd never stepped foot in Canada. And as I began to move away from these spaces and more into Black spaces, something interesting happened there as well. Because even among Black communities that were not my own, from my Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Canadian ethnicity, when I shared my nationality, it broke a connection. What once looked like a familiar face became a threat. My voice lost weight, and I was looked at with suspicion. People were not so keen on hearing my story anymore, and each expression seemed like a contradiction to them, because that aspect of my identity represented dominance, imperialism, and a degree of whiteness that was synonymous with violence. Our country's politics spoke before we could tell the story, and we lost trust. Once seen as brothers and sisters, we were looked at with suspicion, while we watched our white counterparts embraced with open arms. And a lot of times in these spaces, I felt like I was taking up too much space. But really, this identity was taking up too much space. And so I began to walk a tightrope of the Canadian native speaker identity and who I really am, until I just jumped off of the rope and I started diaspora English learning on a mission to change the way the world sees speaking and learning English, to showcase all the places where the language is spoken and the diversity of cultures, faces, and voices. And I haven't looked back since. My identity challenged and continues to challenge people, but I've learned to use it to educate and not be commoditized by it. Which brings me to my next point, which is how the native speaker identity fails some of us, particularly people of color in ELT. It is built off of a single context, a single point in time, a single perspective, and a single but unacknowledged generation. And it fails to acknowledge many important things. But most importantly, it does not honor our ancestors' story. Those whose legends had their tongues cut off for speaking their native tongue. It doesn't acknowledge what was lost. It doesn't acknowledge what was taken. It doesn't acknowledge forced assimilation. It doesn't acknowledge Indigenous people. It doesn't acknowledge how we fought and in some cases gone to war against our own governments and colonial forces to be right where we are. It doesn't acknowledge that others are free to market, weaponize, and profit our identity. And it doesn't acknowledge that despite being a part of a society overrepresented by a dominant group, we are asked to check our culture at the door. In fact, we need to check our culture before being able to enter any doors. And so en masse, POC and ELT, particularly those whose first language is English, endure what I call a silent marginalization because we reflect a privilege that we've never really had and privileges that can be taken away. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about that this identity doesn't address is how we became Native speakers. It doesn't talk about how we became Native speakers. And today I'm going to talk about that. But before I do that, I would like to warn people, it's a very sensitive topic. There's mentions of generational trauma, violence, and brutality, including but not limited to rape, mutilation, and other forms of physical and psychological abuse. So please feel free to turn off your camera if you need to, mute or disengage yourself if you need to, and anything you feel is necessary to ensure your safety in this presentation. Because this next part is not easy. There are many things to celebrate about us, but this is a part that, although it's been overemphasized, it is something that needs to be explained in this context because our identities don't reflect that. And so, how we became Native speakers. And when I say we, I'm going to talk about the story of my lineage, but this is applicable to millions, but not all and every, Black people in North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and beyond, and Britain as well. But I don't claim in any way to speak for everyone. I'm going to tell the story of my ancestors that reflect the story of many. Okay. So we're going to begin. Who has heard this word before? Could you tell me in the chat if you know what this word means? Ma'afa. If not, it's okay. You can say no. If you don't, just put no so I know and I can, okay, great tragedy of our people. No, no, okay. No, thank you. Okay. Ma'afa is a Swahili word that means great disaster, and it has become synonymous with the transatlantic slave trade, also described as the African Holocaust. So, thousands of years ago, dating back tens of thousands of years ago, thriving civilizations, kingdoms, cultures, and nations thrived across what we today call the African continent and spread throughout the world, granting the world with a lot of the knowledge we have today. But besides that, when this process began, that no longer mattered because millions of what we today call Africans, and I say Africans because the word African is derived from the Latin word Africanus, which is not an African language. So we're relying on European scholarship and language to describe another people. So I just want to point that out because we do have to rely on that documentation to tell part of this story. So millions of Africans were taken in captive. And we say Africans today because their true identity that they called themselves was purposely wiped. They were Fante, Ashanti, Akwamu, Bonu, Igbo, Congo, Yoruba, and more that were purposely not told because they went from being citizens of these nations to being property. They were placed in a new world that now they were a Negro. They entered a new world that saw humans and non-humans, that categorized races based on their society's best scientists and scientific research. And their color and origin in the new world now rendered them non-human. They were now property subject to harsh laws, with no natural and civil rights in this new world. A servile class managed solely for economic gain. And what's more, because laws weren't always able to be enforced, citizens classified as whites had the authority and the duty to enforce the subordination of not just slaves, but all Negroes in this new world, as it would be seen as a bad example to be met on equal terms. And that is step one of the cultural and linguistic path of my ancestors and its direction towards the English language. So in this new world, Africans were deemed natural slaves, a primitive heathen people whose dark skin complexion confirmed their God-ordained inferiority, subservience to Christian Europeans. And by the way, I'm going to share my sources at the end for anyone who'd like to do research or learn more, okay? So 1661, another important event that shaped our language occurred. The first slave code in British law was written on the Caribbean island of Barbados. And this had significant repercussions on our language, culture, and identity. So identity already labeled us as non-human and a servile class of people. Now, these set of laws, which were replicated all over, and also by other European colonists, were driven by a fear of rebellion, the nightmare of the English, which therefore made communication limited. So some people, they weren't allowed to talk in their whole lifetime. They didn't talk. Some people wore muzzles, and people were forbidden from, African people were forbidden from congregating, playing any drum, and other forms of communication they had. These laws were codified. And so native languages died very quickly, but new ones were adopted. And to give some context to these laws, they were made to protect slaves as we do men's other goods and chattels. And this document was called An Act for the Better Ordering and Governing of Negroes. Ties were broken almost irreversibly, but new ones were formed. So the practice was that when a new Negro was brought to their new environment where they had an owner, an old Negro would teach them the language of their new reality and the things that were going to dominate their reality and the tasks they had to do. The society also gave language to shape their reality. So that is step two. And also it's a lot of history and information that I really can't, I think it's impossible to summarize, but I'm doing my best and just trying to follow a line of where language was impacted. And so the new language were what we today call Creoles that have many words from the indigenous African languages that the people came from, as well as the English language. In 1834, slavery was officially abolished in law, in British law. And although it was still in practice and attitudes were still the same, it was after this point that education began to be introduced into the Caribbean, and the idea of mass education became available to ex-slaves. And the purpose of the education was to enculturate Negroes, and a lot of what was taught was led by religious groups and funded by religious groups, similar to residential schools, if you're aware of how they worked in North America. And they taught that their native culture, legacy, language was primitive, inferior, barbaric, and by nature did not make them human because they also were not Christians. And this also shaped language, as many rushed to conceal the African elements of their language and culture. However, it also provided a unique opportunity, the opportunity to be human, because before this time, they were not considered human in this new world and new society that we're still in. Afro-Caribbean people actively manipulated material culture to advance their own claim to humanity in a social discourse with racist white plantocracy, which sought to perpetuate the inequities of slavery and the post-emancipation era. Educational advancement represented and had represented throughout the era of slavery a means of escaping the worst rigors of agricultural labor and complete dependence on a land-owning elite. So, despite the fact that education was at odds with culture and identity, and many people shunned their heritage or the lies about their heritage in order to get this opportunity, the core of it was the opportunity to be seen as human, something denied generationally for hundreds of years. This is the story of my English. This is the story of my voice and the voices that shape my voice today. And I encourage everyone to reflect on the journey that their language has taken and think about the generation that they represent in a long history of language changing and being shaped for better or for worse. My suggestion is to bring ethnicity consciousness into ELT as a starting point, because ethnicity allows us to bring more of who we are, not just as individuals, but as communities and families into the classroom. It's holistic, collective, and valuable to navigating our ESL experiences around the world. When I was teaching, and not just teaching, really, when I was living in São Paulo, Brazil, I wish that although I could represent myself and say, here I am, Black Canadians exist, I wish that people could see my family, my community, not just me, but the people that I came from and our story. And I believe that if we're able to bring more of our story into the classroom and not just teach about one ethnicity and one ethnic group and one accent and one way of being, that we can all be a little bit more whole in our classrooms. This is what I want you to see when I identify my variety of English. I want you to see my family. I want you to see my community, the people that I come from, what we've gone through, what we've contributed, how we've shaped the culture that we're a part of. It teaches us more about the nature of the English language itself as it is and not as it's preached to be. And hopefully one day it'll no longer be a surprise that there are more people in Nigeria who speak English as a first language than in England. Yet this continues to surprise people because we don't tell real stories. And so, how can we belong as individuals if our communities don't belong? If our stories don't belong, if we have to use descriptions of ourselves that marginalize us. And that is all for today. That's what I'd like to share with you. If anyone has any questions or would like to comment, I'm very open to it. That's okay. If okay, I'll be honest, I didn't get to read through the chat at the same time, but I thank you all for hearing and listening to my story. I was up very late last night, just wondering if, not wanting to say the wrong thing, not wanting to not cover enough or oversimplify, not wanting to overstep anyone's boundaries or invalidate anyone else's story. And somehow I just said it. So I thank you for being present in this moment with me. It's very meaningful, and I'll never forget it. And I'm glad you're all here with me.
We appreciate you, Kayla. And hold on, we're gonna see if any questions.
Not a question, but a comment.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important that we talk through that history as a fellow Caribbean Jamaican,
Yes.
of Jamaican heritage. Yes, when you put up 1661, I was like, I know where this is going.
Okay.
And I think the other piece that I think this can extend out to is the variations of English that is spoken globally that we need to take into context. And the fact that this inherited language and forced upon us language has variations across the globe. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to work through that. We need to work through our students with that. We need to work through curriculums with that at all levels. And again, you guys know I come from higher ed. We are the biggest perpetrators of some of these things, despite the fact that we're supposed to be the most liberating part of education in some aspects. So I'm just going to leave that right there. But thank you for doing this. Thank you for putting that out there. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Carla, for sharing that with me. It's nice to hear your feedback, and I agree. I think bringing an awareness of the varieties of English and their context. I think context, as you said, is so important, because what I've found is a lot of people like there's different, well, not everyone, but people embrace there's different varieties. But then when you talk about context, you lose a lot of people. All of a sudden, maybe we don't need to talk about that, because it can be seen as political. It can be seen as I think political really is the word. And someone in the chat, let me see, asked me, Kevin, if I could talk about how we can use ethnicity as a starting point in the classroom. I think talking about our own, or I would say creating a consciousness of ethnicity, because a lot of people are not aware of the differences between nationality, ethnicity, and race. And people are just taught about one ethnicity without knowing it's an ethnicity. So when people are shocked to see a Black or an Asian, Canadian, or other ethnicities, they're shocked because they've only been taught about the white Anglo-Saxon ethnicity when there are others. And even if you don't teach about the others, the fact that you say this is the ethnicity we're talking about, it brings the consciousness that there's more. So I think that is a starting point, also talking about our own. And I think if we're able to talk and share about our own, we can put ourselves into context and the rest of the language.
I've just made it more complex by adding the other forced languages of French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch to that complication.
Yes, those are definitely part of the story too. I'm gonna read some of the comments because they've been really great. Justin Garcia, too political. Spoiler alert, everything is political. Yes, it's just whose politics are we talking about? Because when we talk about one ethnic group, we're also talking about their politics, and anything outside that is seen as political. Too preachy, too militant. Facts are facts, and we need to know our history. Without the context, we cannot move forward. Thank you, Justin. Sejan, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's Sejana or Sayana. Something you said wrote, the opportunity to be human, especially hit me hard. It hit me hard as well, you know, doing this research, you know, seeing that people saw the opportunity to be seen as a human, as if that's something you look for. It's just very heartbreaking. Okay. Great read. Okay, Meredith Klein is sharing a great read, African Europeans, An Untold History by Olivette Otel. Okay. I am thinking, thank you for your story, Kayla. I'm thinking of this book, Linguistic Justice. Okay, yes. Yeah, there's many directions that this topic can go in, but I would encourage people to go in all those directions that are authentic to you, because to me, this is a starting point, but I think that we all, you know, should be free to create wholeness for ourselves in the classroom.
Kayla, thank you so much. I wanted to, and then Rebecca, I think your hand was up. I feel like maybe you should go first, and then I'll go after you.
Oh, I just wanted to, it wasn't so much a question, but I just want to thank you and appreciate you, Kayla, for sharing and being so vulnerable. I think there's so much power in sharing stories. And when you put those slides up of your family, I started choking up, because I think it's so powerful to remember that we are not one, but we are 10,000. We come with all of our ancestors. And I felt it, and I I just want to acknowledge and say that I see you, and I see your family, I see your ancestors. I just appreciate you modeling for us what it means to be vulnerable and start speaking truth about our history and who we are. So
thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Kayla. I wanted to answer, if you don't mind, someone asked, how can we use some of this in our classroom? And I'm a third grade teacher, and I had a student who speaks Wolof, like many students who speak Wolof, which is an African language in Senegal. And one of the ways I tried to use our ethnicity was through word study. So when we look at the etymology of words, the kids had questions, and I just let the kids guide me, and they would say, how come we have this word in French and in English, but not in Wolof? And it was like the word plane. And we kind of went into, why is it that the word plane, avion, really didn't have a word? Did I know the word? I'm like, I don't know the word. But it was a really interesting conversation, because the kids kind of talked about what that meant for them. And why is it that that word didn't exist? And how did it come into, why is it that we use the French word? And then we went into a conversation of, why do we use French words added to our Wolof, right? Added to our African language. And it was 8-year-olds asking these questions. So I'm wondering if just doing the etymologies of words and letting the kids ask the questions and just going into those inquiries would be a way to help them discover their identities as well.
Wow, wow. Yeah, I think etymology tells a very interesting story as well. I think it can be very liberating, knowing. I think etymology gives us choices about the way we want to communicate and what we really want to say and don't say. So I would agree. I think that's a great idea. Does anyone have any ideas about, you know, how they'd like to bring ethnicity into their classroom? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I see teacher Dara's hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. It's I can't see everyone's screen at the same time. I think it's the view I have, but Whoever would like to speak, feel free.
Oh, thank you. Just really quick. I'm a languages teacher in Germany, and I try to incorporate the Afro-German story because nobody actually talks about it. So personally as well, having the history in there, it's been really eye-opening these past couple of years because I haven't really looked into it or delved into it that deeply. So it's really nice to see how the kids like identify themselves then within like, you know, the German curriculum and how they see themselves as well. So I really love that idea in French. I'm going to see how much I can do that as well in French as well. That would be really, really great. So thank you for the ideas and the inspiration.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone.
Actually, one of the like most memorable moments I had in school was in a French class. I was in the French immersion program and couldn't identify with the material. It was about, you know, the whole colonizer story, but from the French side. And one day my teacher brought in music from a French rapper, MC Solar. And it just totally changed my perspective. I was like, the things he was talking about, I was like, it just made me totally look at the language differently and have an interest and say, oh, you can actually use this to tell a story. You don't just have to memorize verbs. Like, I remember it to this day, and I was in elementary school.
Absolutely incredible music, and Sayan Super and all of those different groups, like seriously amazing.
I think there is room in the curriculum or in the program of studies to include more than just language classes, but look at courses around etymology, look at courses around linguistics. It wasn't until I went to university that I had my first linguistics course, but I had been learning French for several years. So I really think we need to zero in on what we're teaching, the content and the courses we're offering. There's a lot of space there for a lot more inclusion.
Agreed.
May I say something? Is that okay? Or I don't want to interrupt
Yes,
anyone.
please.
Hello, Teacher K. Hello, everyone. My name is Teacher Dara. I'm based out in New York City, the United States. First of all, I just want to say, Teacher K, fabulous presentation. Well done. I've learned so much. One of the things I wanted to just kind of piggyback what everyone's saying is that when it comes to ethnicity, I think is something that needs to be taught more in our classroom setting. One of the things I try to do with my adult learners is always give them an opportunity to share who they are, where they're from, not just based on the country they're from, but really dive deeper than that. And I've noticed when students would express themselves from their culture, their religion, whatever it is, you know, it kind of opened up a dialogue. And I'm really big on getting my students talking from the jump at any level. So that way they feel a sense of identity, they feel a sense of belongingness. And that if there are differences that arise in the classroom, that gives me the opportunity to now turn it into a lesson. So I think this is something in our profession we need more of. I know from my personal experience, being that I was born in the United States, but most people don't believe that I was born in the United States. They might mistake me for being something else. But I am of Nigerian and Native American heritage. So that's something that I definitely share more now than I did in the past because I was told that wasn't important. So I just want to say that a lot of things that you shared in this presentation, I personally relate to, and I think it's amazing. And I would also encourage all teachers, no matter what your culture is or race is or nationality, to embrace who you are. Don't forget where you come from, and really, you know, encourage our learners to embrace who they are as well.
Thank you so much, Teacher Dara. Full disclosure, Teacher Dara is a dear friend of mine and collaborator. So I was aware of your ancestry, but thank you so much for sharing that and how we can use that to teach, to educate. And something, you know, I thought of as well is bringing ethnicity consciousness into our teaching, it shows how our countries, especially those of us in Western countries, are similar to others, because most countries don't have one. I don't know any country that just has one ethnic group. Most countries have multiple ethnic groups who have different varieties of language, different food, different history, different origins, different roots. And I think that we'll see that our makeup, despite imbalances of power, our makeup is quite similar. Although they try to tell the story that there's like one people and one system and everything, that's just not true. I'm going to read some comments here. Unless anyone else wants to speak, you're welcome to. Sedana, something I've been working on, embedding oral history in the curriculum, assign students to interview someone they see as an ancestor by blood or not, and or interview one another. I like that. It's a great exercise. Justin Garcia, Lorena German writes about, or Herman, I don't know, writes about demystifying and destigmatizing conversations about race and ethnicity. It's crucial that this happens with young kiddos. Yes, I would love to destigmatize and demystify these conversations. Okay, Dr. Dale Taylor, as a Bayesian Canadian, that 1661 slave code is abominable. We need to know that history. However, we gave the world Maya Motley. Thank you for that. Yes, there's a lot of history. Sedana Sletton, I want to credit Mary Romney, who wrote an Afro-Caribbean in the Nazi era, from Papiamentu to German, with the idea on oral history. She has been mentoring me. Wow. Great resources in the chat. Rodeanne said, and so many stories of joy as well. Okay. Oh, and what I wanted to share actually before I end is the sources. So if anyone is interested in knowing more, reading more, if you use this QR code, you can get to this page here that has the sources that I've used. Oh, I think, okay, so the page that you'll go to with the QR code has a slightly updated list. So this list here, it's not the complete list, but you can get the complete list using this QR code.
Kelly, would you mind going back to that quote right before this page?
This one? Okay.
Can I quickly say something? Yeah, Kayla, thank you for a wonderful presentation. Sorry, my video is off because it's almost 9 p.m. here, but there was something that Rama said that really struck a chord with me about the children in Senegal, asking why there are certain words like aeroplane that exist in France, in French, and English, but not in the local languages or dialects. And I just have a comment to make and just a question I want to leave with the group. It doesn't have to be answered, but just something for us to think about. So the progress of our indigenous languages was truncated and interrupted due to the Ma'afa, as you rightly referenced, and also the violence of colonization. So a lot of our indigenous languages did not have the chance to develop as they could have, when compared to other colonial languages. So our languages were reduced to dialects, and they were not seen as languages of science, of maths, of philosophy, and all the academic disciplines. So now that we're at an age where we're decolonizing everything, how can we, first of all, in international schools, or even in our family groups, in our setting, find ways to preserve what is left of our languages, and also find ways to incorporate our languages as languages of maths, of science, of geography, and of philosophy, and all the, academic disciplines.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I wasn't aware of that process on the continent was happening as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just something for us to think about. I don't expect to have any answers, but I think we should all think about it.
I would love to see that happen too.
All right. Justin. If it's one person, we're going to say thank you to, especially. We thank Justin for just the voices in the organization of the 2 days. So please give some love to Justin. They did a phenomenal job. We so much appreciate you, Justin. Thank you, Rama. Thank you, Christina. Parisa, we're going to pull you up here. We're going to start our closing. Thank you again, Kayla, for your voice and just for, again, getting us to think through finding wholeness in ELT and thinking through ethnicity. It made me think of, I believe Justin had an identity map, and I've seen a lot of folks do that too as a way to explore and integrate this into the classrooms as well. And like you're saying, because so many have their own definitions when it comes, or see race but don't consider ethnicity and things of that nature. Just hearing what people said about, I was told don't mention that, don't say that. And so I think that's been that theme over these couple of days, is that fully embrace yourselves and your identities, and just, again, Rebecca showing and sharing pictures and images of our families, and knowing that we are a collection and collective of our families. I think my mother's still on here. My mother snuck in here. She might be going now. But again, that we are we are who we are because of our history and our lineage and the importance of that. So we thank you all so much for that. As well as Iabo, I'm not sure if she's here. Na Young, I think, is gone because she was a little ill earlier. But again, just want to say thank you to everyone. Yeah, she was on here earlier. I'll see if she was on. She had messaged me, said, hey, I popped on. But yeah, like we said, all the materials that we shared will be collecting those up and then sharing those out. We'll add them on Linktree as well. So those will be part of the follow-up to everybody that'll go out. So before we close, I want to get Parisa up here from Women of Color ELT to give her remarks. And then we'll do a brief little AIELOC slide through, and then we will close with Angeline.